Everyone, this is Professor DePaulo. Welcome you back to Site 265, fully online. And this week we're going to be talking about how to write the discussion section. So before I move into how to write the discussion section, I need to go over the results. So these are the results from the survey that you completed, but it's been aggregated over several semesters. So you're going to see several semesters worth of results here. I have analyzed the data and I've written the results section for you. And you can find the results section under the assignments page. And if we look into the where it says results COVID study 2021 to 2023, you're just going to copy and paste this results section into your final paper because I've already written it for you. Let me go through what we tested and what we found analyzing the data. So here are the results. Just gonna make this a little bit, zoom in a little bit on this. Okay. So remember that there were 5 hypotheses tested, and those 5 hypotheses were listed in the introduction. The last paragraph of your introduction listed the 5 or provided the 5 hypotheses. The first hypothesis was that there was a correlation between empathy and mask wearing. So this was tested statistically, and it was found that there was no correlation between empathy and mask wearing. So we did not support that first hypothesis. As you can see here, the correlation, which is little r, the Pearson product moment correlation, is very small. It's near 0. And then the p-value is basically the probability of this is basically the probability of this due to chance, if you want to think of it that way. And so we want this to be a very low probability due to chance, and we want this to be a higher probability due to something happening in the study. So technically this p-value, probability value, is the probability of getting this result or a better result if the null hypothesis is true. And you may not understand all of that terminology. If you take statistics, you'll start learning about that. But since you're not required to have statistics at this point, I've done all the data analysis for you. Suffice it to say that there's really no significant correlation between empathy and mask wearing. There was also no difference in empathy between people receiving the COVID vaccine and those not receiving the COVID vaccine. And you see the p-value is 0.063. So ideally we want that p-value to be less than 0.05. That is our alpha value, or the critical value we've chosen. When our p-value is less than 0.05, we reject the null. The null is basically the hypothesis that there was no effect. And when we reject the null, we support the research hypothesis, which is the hypothesis we're testing. So the goal of statistics is to reject the null and support the research or alternative hypothesis. Here we haven't done that in the first 2. So our first 2 hypotheses here, empathy and mask wearing, were not correlated. And there was no difference in empathy between people receiving the vaccine and those not receiving the vaccine. It was close, but it wasn't significant. Now the third hypothesis was supported. There was a significant correlation between health anxiety and fear of future pandemics. This was strongly supported. 0.306, p-value is way less than 0.05. And so we're pretty confident this actually happened. There was a significant correlation between health anxiety and fear of future pandemics. There's a lot of reasons for that. You're worried about your health. Well, you're going to be certainly worried about COVID, but you're going to also be worried about the future. And that can be a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing. It can take over your life, and then you start becoming paranoid. You don't want to do things, and because you're worried about, reemergence or future pandemics or something bad happening in the future. So that hypothesis was supported. So that was the first. So hypothesis number 3, correlation between health anxiety and fear of future pandemics, was supported. The first 2 were not. Now, was there a relationship between anxiety and people who lost family and friends to the pandemic compared to those who did not lose family and friends to the pandemic? There were no differences. There was no difference in generalized anxiety, and there was no difference in depression between those who have lost family and friends and those who have not. That's interesting because we would expect if you lost family and friends, your anxiety levels might be higher. Your depression levels might be higher. But it could also be that people moved on in general. Like they're just done with the pandemic and they've moved on. And, we've all, we probably all have known someone who has died from this. And we've mourned them, we've grieved them, and we've moved on. For the most part, people are just tired of it, tired of the pandemic. Even if people have died, they're just tired of the pandemic. And finally, there's no correlation between attachment anxiety and desire to have family and friends vaccinated. So that's a little bit surprising because if you have high attachment anxiety, you're clingy and you're worried about your partner, your romantic partner, and your family, of course, too, family and friends. And you would think that people who are high in attachment anxiety would want vaccination, but once again, we're a couple years into this, and at this point, people probably don't care anymore. And so the research is important because, we want to know what's working and what's not working. What's obviously not working is people caring in the long run. People are just tired. Just tired of everything. It's tired of masks. Basically, they've given that up. They're tired of social distancing. They don't care. They're tired of staying home. They're going out. Maybe after a year, people started getting tired. Within 2 or 3 years, they're just done. They're done with things. So even though this is over a period of a couple of years, we're seeing trends to suggest that most people are just done with the pandemic. It's not that they don't care anymore, but they're just tired of it. They've moved on to better things. For those that were worried and tend to worry about their health, yes, they're still worried about the pandemic and they're worried about future pandemics. So we have different subgroups of people. We have a subgroup of people that are worried about their health and worried about things to come in the future. Maybe there'll be another pandemic. Maybe it'll be worse. And then you have a large group of people that are just kind of like, I did this and I'm moving on. I don't want to hear about it anymore. I don't want to talk about it in a research methods class. Why are we talking about it? It's like so over. COVID-19 was so many years ago. 4 years ago. 3 years ago. We're done with it. Let's go back to normal. Or the new normal, whatever it is. I understand that. However, it's important that the general public's reaction to something like a pandemic be studied. Because when the next pandemic comes, are people going to be done with that too? Like, we had COVID and that was all a waste and we shut down everything and we stayed home and, we got through it. So why do we have to do that again? The masks, I'm tired of masks. I'm not doing that again. And so if there's a future pandemic and everybody's kind of tired of pandemics, are they going to still be tired of it in the future, say in like 10, 15, 20 years from now? If there was another pandemic, would people just be like still exhausted or not care? Or are they going to take it seriously again and start, social distancing and wearing masks? I don't know. Part of my goal as a researcher who studies a lot of health clinical topics is to figure out, how things are going to be dealt with and improvements to be made in the future. But based on our 5 hypotheses, we've supported one of those 5 hypotheses and we failed to support the other 4. So that's not too promising. But that's the point of research. We don't always support things we plan to support. There's always, ideas and then reality. And there's a lot of other things I could have tested here, and I chose not to, but, what I'm reading from the data is that most people are done with the pandemic, except if you have high levels of health anxiety, now you're still worried about it and worried about the future. So that could be good, it could be bad. If it's, overwhelmingly anxious about the future, that's a bad thing. People that don't want to go out, they don't want to live their life because of the pandemic, they're still afraid, they're afraid of the future pandemics. Yeah, you don't want to sort of hunker down and isolate yourself, because we know that social support, interactions with people, this is all positive for our development. We are a social being. We are social beings. We need to interact with each other. We need to go out, have fun, talk, be with people, not just Zoom. Not just text messaging. There has to be meaningful in-person interactions for us to thrive as a species. Pandemic showed us that. Also showed us the problems with isolation and distance learning and school issues, and not just academic development, but social, emotional development. And we're not going to know the whole story for another few years as we study this cohort that was in school during the pandemic, and what are the long-term consequences of being isolated like this for a couple years in some cases. So that's the results. That I have written for you. Just copy and paste it and put it into your final paper. Results comes after method and before discussion. So just copy, paste, you're done. Now, how do we write the discussion? Well, we have the results. Now we can start writing the discussion. Let's take a look at the guide here for the discussion. So you're going to write the word discussion, centered, non-bold, non-italic. So just discussion, 12-point font. And then I want 4 paragraphs for our discussion. Paragraph 1 is going to restate our hypotheses. So all 5 of them. You're going to restate them, and then you're going to tell me if you supported them. Well, we supported 1 out of 5. You want to make sure you tell me that the current research failed to support the hypothesis of a positive correlation between empathy and mask wearing, or empathy and vaccination. But the current study did support the positive relationship or positive correlation between health anxiety and fear of future pandemics. So you're going to restate those 5 hypotheses, the results of those 5 hypotheses, in that first paragraph. So it's kind of like a summary of the results section without the data, without the statistics. So in sort of general terms, what happened to those 5 hypotheses? So tell me one by one if these hypotheses were supported or not supported. That's all. 1 paragraph of that, talking about the 5 hypotheses. Paragraph 2, how did your findings relate to past research, especially that research discussed in your introduction? So you've done introduction stuff, you've done a literature review, and how do these current results from the class survey on COVID behaviors, how do those results mesh with previous data, previous research that's out there? Well, there's a lot of research talking about empathy and mask wearing. The class results don't agree with that. So you want to make sure you state that. And in paragraph 2, you want to cite. So you want to cite that previous research that agrees or doesn't agree with the current data. So you may say something like, in contrast to Smith and Weil, 2021, the current study did not find a positive correlation between mask wearing and empathy. Right? Or similar to the research done by Johnson and et al. 2022, there was a positive correlation between anxiety, generalizing, or health anxiety, and fear of future pandemics. So go through those results, those 5 hypotheses that we either supported, and we failed to support 4 of them. We only supported 1, but go through those 5 hypotheses and basically tell the audience, do the current results differ from what is found in the previous research? So, and you want to cite that previous research. So make sure you provide the author and the date. You need citations in paragraph 2. Why is that important? Because that's very important. What is different about the current study compared to previous research? So you want to state what's different, what's the same in paragraph 2, and then you're going to come back in paragraph 3 and you're going to talk more about these differences. Right? The class study was different or similar to these whatever studies you researched. And that stuff should have been in your introduction section. Paragraph 3. Now here's where we're going to drill down on this. Why did you fail to support your hypotheses when you did? So there are 5 hypotheses, 4 of them failed. Do you have explanations why? What were the limitations of the study? Well, the sample is 130 or something. That's not super small, but it's not large. And that sample was also gathered from New York students. Students at a community college in New York City, BMCC. Are those students at BMCC representative of the entire population? Probably not. Are people in New York City representative of the entire population? Probably not, right? Especially with regard to how they dealt with COVID. We know that people in New York City tended to take more precautions. They treated it differently than maybe if you were in the middle of the country, where there were higher rates. Like, for example, in Arkansas, there were astronomical rates of COVID. Now, there were very high rates in New York City at the beginning, but that's because New York City was the epicenter of the virus at the start. But as time went on, New York City, the numbers diminished. People started following directions, for the most part. Especially at the beginning, after that first wave, horrible wave. Whereas, places like Arkansas, their numbers went up. They never contained it. Until they probably reached herd immunity. But they didn't contain it before that. So these are some of the limitations. Sample may be a bit small. Sample is primarily made up of New York residents and also younger residents of New York City. So most of the participants in the survey were college-age students, the majority. Are college-age students having the same attitude towards COVID as adults, or even older adults? Right? So college students are just like, I'm done with this. COVID's over. Give me my life back. Older adults might think twice about that. I have diabetes. I have high blood pressure. I'm overweight. I have these problems. I'm going to play it more cautiously. I'm afraid of getting sick. My social life is not what it used to be many years ago. If you're an older adult, let's say you're in your 70s, 80s, 90s, or older, your social life is not probably, you're not out there going to bars like these teenagers and college students are, and not caring about social distancing or wearing masks and just having fun with their friends. They're caring about staying out of the hospital. So the sample that was gathered from BMCC is probably not representative of the general population in that regard, with regard to age and the types of people that are in the sample. So that's another limitation. Another limitation is its survey data. Are people going to provide you accurate information on the survey? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Is there any social desirability here to respond in some way? So there's a lot of limitations here. Are there any problems with internal validity? So you want to state the internal validity and the external validity of the study. The internal validity is cause and effect conclusions. Can we draw cause and effect conclusions from the current study? And the answer is obviously no, because we didn't do an experiment, we did a survey. So with a survey, you can't draw cause and effect conclusions. Therefore, with a survey, you have low internal validity. Now, what about external validity? Can we generalize these results to the entire population? The answer is no. There's low external validity also here, because the sample is made up of younger New York City residents who may not be representative of the entire population. I can guarantee you, people that live in New York City are not similar to people that live in Nebraska, Kansas, North Dakota, right? Completely different viewpoint, and that's before you even take into account politics, which is vastly different. How the whole vaccination and the whole social distancing, mask wearing thing got politicized, which it shouldn't have, but it did. And the red states versus the blue states, and defiance over directions from the NIH, especially in red states. So there were problems with both internal and external validity. You want to state that. And then finally, in paragraph 4, what are the real world implications of the study? Well, there are, especially with regard to people that are high in health anxiety. Those people need help because they're going to be extra sensitive to problems in the future related to a possible future pandemic. And that can stop people with high levels of health anxiety from doing things they want to do. Like, let's not go on vacation because I'm still afraid of the pandemic. Right? I mean, there's lots of things that can input, and that's not saying that people with high levels of health problems are being more protective. That's different. What I'm saying is people that are worried about their health constantly are still worried about the pandemic. And they're worried about something happening in the future. Is it going to come back? Is it going to be worse? Is there going to be another one? And how does that help or hurt them? A lot of times, it's helpful to have some level of anxiety, but when you're high on anxiety and you're really worried about something happening in the future, and you're disasterizing possible outcomes, that can hurt you more than it can help you. So there are a lot of implications here. The study did not show the link with empathy that we hypothesized. That's interesting. Why isn't there a relationship between empathy and mask wearing, empathy and vaccination? Does it have something to do with the age of our participants or the location of our participants? Do our participants just not really put too much weight in terms of the pandemic? Just they're tired of it. How would you address these limitations in future research? Well, if you're trying to address things like sample size, that's pretty easy to address. If you're addressing things like location of the participants, all being from New York, that's a little harder to address. But there's ways around that, right? So how would you address these limitations in the future? So give me some ideas that you have. So this is 4 paragraphs, double-spaced, 12-point font, 1-inch margins. Save it as a PDF and upload it to Blackboard. So there'll be a link, and there is a link currently on Blackboard. Under assignments, you have discussion, and you can upload it here. And most people have been uploading it fine. There are a couple of students that have had a little bit of trouble uploading it. I'm trying to figure out why that's the case, but save as a PDF, upload it. If there's still a huge problem, you can always email it to me, and I can upload it myself. I haven't had any trouble uploading things, but everybody's different, using different computers, different browsers, all that stuff. So that discussion section should be done based on sort of the guidance that I've given you. And that's pretty much it. You don't have to cite that much in the discussion. You want to cite some studies in paragraph 2, but for the rest of it, you don't really have to cite. It's just really paragraph 2 that I'm focused on. And if you have any questions, let me know. Drop me a line. If you need to meet, let me know. I will set that up. And hope you enjoy the week and you have success writing this. And if you have any problems, let me know. So goodbye for now. See you soon.